Cyrus the Great was dead, and the world held its breath. Royal successions were precarious events at the best of times, but for a realm as recently forged as that of the Achaemenid Empire, they could be fatal. Great men leave great power vacuums after all, and Cyrus was the greatest man the world had ever seen. Without his guiding hand, the empire may well fall apart. The Medes rose and fell in the space of a single generation. Would the Persians be the same? The answer, for now at least, was no. Cyrus had two sons, Cambyses and Bardiya. To Cambyses, Cyrus left the rule of the empire, while to Bardiya he gave the governorship of the powerful province of Bactria. Cyrus's gamble was that if he gave Bardiya a plum posting in the east, far from Cambyses with plenty of foreign tribes to war with, then he would remain content, and the empire would remain peaceful. But would his gamble pay off? Would the empire hold? That was for the next generation to find out. Cambyses' coronation passed smoothly enough, but he was nevertheless conscious to prevent anyone from gathering enough legitimacy or power to oppose him. To this end, he decided upon the unprecedented step of marrying both his sisters, Atossa and Roxanne. No sooner had he been crowned and married than he began preparing for the campaign that would define his reign. During the time he had been on the throne, Cyrus had brought many powerful and ancient kingdoms crashing down, sweeping them aside and replacing them with the new Persian world order. There was one kingdom, however, that Cyrus had missed, a kingdom of such ancient majesty that it was as old to Cyrus then as Cyrus is old to us now. It was this kingdom that Cambyses now prepared to conquer: Egypt. For 4 years, Cambyses diligently prepared for the forthcoming campaign, levying troops from all corners of the empire, assembling a powerful navy, a national first for the Persians, prepping a war chest, and studying his foes. Cambyses was rewarded for doing his homework, for when the Persians launched their invasion and the two sides met in battle, it was the invader who emerged victorious. As the land route to the Nile Delta was swept clean of opposition, the nascent Persian navy, constituted of Phoenician vessels, glided along the featureless Egyptian coast unopposed. The remaining Egyptian opposition was uprooted and neutralised, while the cities to the west of Egypt, along the Libyan coast, bent the knee to the King of Kings voluntarily. Cambyses' triumph had been swift and spectacular, but he would pay a heavy historical price. Chances are, if you've heard anything of Cambyses, then it's probably of him being a corrupt and despotic tyrant. There's a good reason for this, and it's not because he was actually that bad of a ruler. You see, prior to the Persian conquest, Egypt was a kingdom dominated by its priestly class. A string of fattened priestly estates stretched across the kingdom, and its uppity priests were used to having great sway across the lands of the Nile. Cambyses, however, was not a man to tolerate uppityness from anyone, and the priestly estates were slowly cut down to size. So why is this important? Well, the priestly class would not forgive him for stripping away their land, and in the centuries that followed they never missed a chance to tarnish his reputation. Gross and sacrilegious stories would swirl in the wake of Cambyses' reign. They would speak of the Persian king's cruelty and despotism, but the peak of this slander was the story that Cambyses had stabbed the Apis bull, one of Egypt's most sacred animals. And who is our main source for this event? Herodotus. And who were his main sources for these events? Well, none other than the Egyptian priests themselves. It's thanks to them that the cultural memory of Cambyses today is one of a mad dictator. But in reality he was far more adept at using local traditions to his benefit. Just like Cyrus, he made sure to tolerate the local deities and was keen to encourage and sponsor their worship. In truth, the Apis bull was honoured, not shivved. He had seen firsthand how Cyrus had built his empire, and he had been making notes. He may not have tolerated overbearing priests, but he, like his father, knew that it was essential to ensure a peaceful population and strengthen royal rule through all the instruments available, and there are no instruments of royal power quite like the gods themselves. Cambyses spent 4 years preparing for his Egyptian expedition, and he would spend another 3 entrenching Persian rule in the province, driving back the Nubians, pacifying the natives, and cutting the priestly class down to size. Yet while he was busy abroad, dangerous undercurrents began to swirl at home. The dark tales told by the Egyptian priestly class of Cambyses' degeneracy may have been greatly exaggerated, but amidst the lies and slander there lies at least an inkling of the truth. Compared to Cyrus, who had a genius for coddling egos, Cambyses was inevitably more heavy-handed in his dealings with the nobility than his father, and was slowly becoming suffocating to the Persian aristocracy. But Cambyses had been far from home for several years now, and events began to slip from his control. Perhaps it was time for a new king, if only an alternative to Cambyses could be found. If only there was someone who was a proven warrior, a peerless aristocrat, and a blood relative of Cyrus. If only. Oh wait, there was. Bardiya had initially been content to stay in Bactria, but as he became more aware of the febrile situation in the heartland of Persia, he began to agitate against his brother. He put out feelers to the aristocracy and bought the support of the provinces by promising a 3-year remission of taxes. Then, in the March of 522 BC, he laid claim to the throne. Much of the east rose to support him. Jolted into action, Cambyses gathered his army and rushed along the main trunk road through Syria, determined to stamp out the fires of rebellion before they could spread any further. The world braced itself for the inevitable clash. Would this be it? Would the Persians tear themselves apart? The answer, once again, was no. At some point during the march home, Cambyses leapt onto his horse and was gashed in the thigh by his sword. The wound festered, and gangrene duly set in. Not much later, Cambyses, the King of Kings, was dead. His suspiciously timely death would be the cause of much gossip, but nothing conclusive could be proved. After all, in the time before modern medicine, great kings were just as likely to die of an infected scratch as they were of an axe through the head. What follows next is a very murky and strange series of events made worse by later propaganda, so you're going to have to bear with me on this one. If this was an accident, then it was a damn convenient one. Bardiya's rule was now unchallenged, or so it seemed. In fact, the new king's throne was balanced precariously atop a house of cards, just waiting to come tumbling down. The policy of tax remission on the conquered provinces had seemed so appealing while he was drumming up support, but now it left Bardiya scratching his head onto how he was supposed to make up this shortfall in cash. Bardiya agonised over this dilemma for the best part of 3 minutes before deciding just to yoink the estates of the aristocracy. Anyone considered an enemy of Bardiya would have all their valuables confiscated by the state, and while this did help to ease his financial burdens, it also confirmed him as one of the most hated men in Persia. Conspiracies quickly began to form against the new king, with the most formidable of these being led by a man who looms large in the annals of history, Darius, son of Itaspes. Darius was a distant cousin of Cambyses and Bardiya, and therefore a member of the Achaemenid clan, and had previously served Cambyses as a lance-bearer, one of the most prestigious positions in Persia, despite its seemingly menial title. He was daring, well-connected and intelligent, with a gift for propaganda and a ruthless talent for politicking, and he was soon building a conspiracy consisting of 7 of the most powerful men in the empire. Now, we are told that Darius was actually the last person to be invited to the conspiracy, but the fact that he had several deep connections to the other conspirators and was related to the ruling Achaemenids makes it seem unlikely that he was a latecomer. Furthermore, he quickly became preeminent in organising the plot against Bardiya. Some of the conspirators urged for caution and patience, but Darius was convinced that they should strike hard and strike fast. So they set out at lightning speed across the empire, joined by Darius's brother Artaphernes, determined to find Bardiya as he was passing through Media on his way to the empire's summer capital of Ecbatana. As the king travelled, he turned off the main road to stop at the fort of Sikyavaltish. Following not long after were the 7 conspirators. When 7 of the most powerful men in the empire rocked up in front of the guards and told them that they had an audience with the king, the guards could do little but stutter, nod and open the gates for them. They moved quickly from there, and by the time anyone thought to stop the intruders, they were outside the king's chambers. Bardiya was with a concubine when the conspirators burst into his room and set upon him savagely. Bardiya, for his part, was a famed warrior and tried in vain to fend them off with a chair leg. Unfortunately, Bardiya was fatally allergic to sharp objects, and a well-placed dagger blow from Artaphernes finally brought Bardiya down. Darius need only watch as the King of Kings, the last son of Cyrus, crumpled onto the cold floor with a thud. Yet even as Bardiya's corpse was being hurriedly disposed of, Darius was cooking up a propaganda piece of legend. He told a different tale of Bardiya's death. The man whom he had killed was not Bardiya at all. He was not even an Achaemenid. Instead, Darius had made a shocking discovery. According to him, Bardiya had been killed during the reign of Cambyses, and the man who claimed to be Bardiya was actually a devious magus by the name of Gautama. With his dark powers of sorcery, the Magus had disguised himself as Bardiya and claimed to rule in his place. Now, how exactly a nobody managed to not only convince his close aides that he was the son of Cyrus, but also gain the support of many of the Empire's provinces, Darius did not bother to explain. He didn't really need to, for anyone who could contradict his tidy tale was soon silenced, and the new King of Kings instead prepared for the wars to come. Darius's coup had gone well so far, but winning the throne is only half the battle. Keeping it's the hard part. It is testament to the general suspicion with which his claim was viewed and his insecurity on the throne that rebellions erupted almost immediately across the empire. In Mesopotamia, a son of the last Babylonian king called Nebuchadnezzar III declared independence from Persia. Meanwhile, in the heartland of Persia and the provinces of Elam and Media, ambitious nobles did the same. Surrounded by fires on all sides, Darius and his allies scrambled to stamp them out before they all lost their heads. Cut off from Persia proper, Darius decided to leave a holding force in Media, while he turned his attention to the real prize, Babylon. Persia may have been the imperial homeland, but Babylon, with 250,000 inhabitants, was undoubtedly the centre of the empire, and by extension the world. Darius had no time to lose. He forded the Tigris and rushed to face Nebuchadnezzar in battle. Darius won a decisive victory and swept the rebel king aside. Once again, Babylon lay undefended, and the city's inhabitants, seeing no reason to sink with Nebuchadnezzar's ship, opened the gates to him. They didn't need to worry though, because Darius entered the city peacefully and decided to give Nebuchadnezzar the same treatment he had given Bardiya. Persian heralds suddenly announced that the man claiming to be Babylon's king was in fact another impostor. According to Darius, his actual name was Nidintu-Bel. With this point made, Darius quietly had the rebel impaled before moving on to deal with the others. Bitter but indecisive battles raged in Media, while the Persian nobles who initially supported Bardiya rallied around another figure who also claimed to be Bardiya. Darius and his allies moved fast. In Persia, the rebel leader was soundly defeated in battle, while Elam was brought to heel once again. Darius then turned his death laser towards the rebellious Medes, who had been slowly driving his forces out of the country. But now that the King of Kings was on his way, the Persian forces counterattacked and flattened the Medes. It should be noted that the Median rebellion was not universal, and one group of Darian loyalists were led in fact by a Mede. The rebel Median king was defeated and impaled just like Nebuchadnezzar. The Persian claimant had survived his earlier defeat and regrouped for a second battle, but Darius was on a roll, and the rebel was found, defeated, and impaled. Darius clearly has an ironic sense of humour, because the place he decided to impale all the rebellious nobles was called the Mount of Mercy. Finally, peace and order had been restored to his empire, something that is celebrated in perhaps the most famous Achaemenid monument. The Behistun inscription, even 2,000 years later, is still an awe-inspiring sight. In it, Darius imperiously tramples over the body of Gautama, while the other rebel kings are lined up in front of him. Among other things, the same inscription appears above all. He lied. In the eyes of Darius, he was the embodiment, the incarnation of a divinely promoted order. To oppose that would be to throw the world into chaos. So Darius was divinely displeased when, in 520 BC, word reached him that Elam, the region between Persia and Mesopotamia, had revolted for the second time. The troops rolled in and the revolt was quickly stamped out. But Darius, eager to drive this point home, flattened the Elamite capital of Susa and constructed a new city on top of it. But this would not be the last bit of royal building Darius would engage in. Instead, the new king wished to make his mark on the empire in stone. So he built a new capital, fittingly located on the Mount of Mercy where the Persian rebels had been impaled, called Parsa, literally the Persian word for Persia. The Greeks eventually corrupted Parsa into Persepolis, the city of the Persians, from where we get the name in English today. Resources were brought in from all corners of the empire, gold and silver from India, frescoes from Ionia, and bricks from Babylonia. All of these and more came together to build a capital that reflected the myriad ethnic nature of its empire. And in this respect, Darius would follow in the footsteps of Cyrus, continuing the tendency to respect the local traditions of the empire, and painting himself as the guardian of local gods. Meanwhile, closer to home, Darius's dominance had been enforced by more brutal means. The roving aristocracies of Persia and Media, which had caused so much trouble for Cambyses and Astyages, had been broken by brutal civil wars, and would no longer be a threat to Darius. Overall, Darius's reign would be one of reforms. With the empire now in a state of relative peace, he set about enacting several reforms to tribute collection and trade. First and foremost was coinage. After the conquest of Lydia, Cyrus had continued to strike coins in a Lydian style, but Darius introduced a new bimetallic standard, with a gold coin called a daric and a silver coin called a siglos. The spread of coinage throughout the empire helped to facilitate international trade. Furthermore, he standardized and streamlined tax collection throughout the empire by dividing it into specialized tax districts, with their annual tax being tailored to each region. He installed his allies and supporters in the various provinces or satrapies across the empire. Each satrapy was generally as large as a kingdom, and many of the satraps ruled like kings, but they never forgot who was top dog. The King of Kings made use of royal secretaries to keep tabs on his satraps and report back any suspicious behaviour. Darius's army of bureaucrats ensured smooth tribute collection, and he soon put this money to good use. Several campaigns were led to the north and east, into Central Asia and India, extending Persian dominion in the east to its maximum point, while in the west the Greek island of Samos was annexed, and expeditions into the wild lands of Thrace and beyond were mounted. All that, however, is for another episode. For this is where we leave Darius and the Persians for now. Next episode, we take a break from the action and take a look at how Greece was getting along, and in the episode after that, we'll watch as the Ionian Revolt finally erupts and sparks all-out war between Persia and the Greeks.